What is interesting, according to the idea of community of Benedictines, it is that this type of community it was developed in relation with the idea of hierarchy. In this sense, this idea of hierarchy it was developed on the rule of Saint Benedict. Therefore, the idea of community of the Benedictines it was maintained in relation with the main idea of the rule of Saint Benedict. Therefore, according to this type of community, there is a main rule into the hierarchy that it is really important as the basement to maintain a specific type of behavior. This is really important because according to this sense we understand that the Benedictines in general try to maintain their behaviors in relation with the rule of San Benedictine. Therefore, there is a specific type of hierarchy between the monasteries. In fact, the different type of monasteries of the Benedictines have to follow the main rule of Benedictine. But at the same time, according to the idea of the first type of the Middle Ages, in particular for the 6th century AD and 7th century AD, according to this type of point of view, there is a specific type of connection with on the main idea of San Benedictine and his rule, but at the same time on idea of decentralization of power and at the same time interpretation of this type of rule, in particular on that parts of the rule that are not so specific. This is really interesting because the rule of San Benedictine tried to develop a specific type of connection with land. Therefore, for example, Benedictine criticized that monks who continue to travel between lands, etc. In fact, according to Benedictine, the main monks, the best monks are that monks that stay in a land, in a specific type of land, in a territory, and founding their monastery, staying into that land. But at the same time, according to the first type of the Middle Ages idea of the Benedictines, it is really important to maintain a specific type of decentralization of power in relation with the idea of interpretation of this type of rule. And this is really interesting because we understand, therefore, the Benedictines anticipated the idea of, on one hand, the decentralization of power. In fact, according to the Benedictine rule or the Benedictine behavior, the main rule we can as monks debate the main rule in its interpretations, and also in the hierarchy of the monasteries. For example, there is the main monks and therefore the others. There is the most important monks into the monastery and then the others. In any case, the main monks cannot develop a specific type of rule because the rule is for all of the monks. Therefore, also the monks that are at the basement of the hierarchy can criticize the main monks, the main monk or the other monks that are at the top of a hierarchy, when according to the rule of San Benedictine these monks are not developing the main idea, or are not following the main idea of San Benedictine. This is really interesting because, therefore, according to this type of project, the monasteries of the Benedictines were born on the one hand as the idea of decentralization of power, when the main rule is one and is outside the project, or better, outside the idea of monopolism that could develop from some specific type of monks. Therefore, each monk has to follow the main rule of Benedictine, but at the same time the idea of debating, the idea of criticizing, the idea of possibilities to maintain a specific type of criticism, it was maintained in this sense, because therefore there is an objective rule, but at the same time there is an interpretation in this type of objective rule that could develop between different type of monks, and not only the monks of the same monasteries, and for example the possibility of the monks at the basement of the hierarchy to criticize the monks at the top of the hierarchies, but also the type of situations, for example, that explain as the monks of different type of monasteries can criticize between them, and explaining therefore how this type of decentralization can develop a specific type of different type of interpretation between the monasteries. This is really important, and we have to consider this because in this sense we can understand how the Benedictines anticipated on the one hand the idea of natural law as dignity of the humans, in relation therefore between the decentralization of power as interpretation therefore in this sense of power, a sort of anticipation of the idea of common law that in any case, for example, also the United States maintained and developed during the 8th century, the 18th century AD. In the foundation, but this is not the case because the Benedictines in general they developed themselves in particular in the reality of England at the beginning of the Middle Ages, and it's not a case that this type of connection could develop between the idea of common law as the idea of interpretation of law in relation with the idea of religion people that develop a specific type of interpretation of the law in relation with the interpretation of God, or in relation with the interpretation of the rule of a man that consider really important the idea of a Christian God, as in this sense interpretation of the law of the constitutionalism. In fact, the rule of Saint Benedict, it was a sort of constitutionalism law in relation with a community that it is divided from a lot of communities into the same community. And it is really interesting because the same community as Benedictine community, it is divided from different type of monasteries that maintain a specific type of rule divided between the interpretation of this rule. On the other hand, there is also the idea of cyclic time. In fact, what was the main type of lives that these monks developed and did? In particular, these lives, it was in relation with the motto ora et labora, that it was developed after the Middle Ages. And in this type of motto ora et labora, it is interesting because according to Saint Benedictine and his creed, it is important that the monks continue to reflect and develop a specific type of the same behaviors during the time, therefore a circular type of behaviors, not linear. In this sense, this type of motto criticized the idea of linear time that it was developed by St. Augustine. In fact, we know that St. Augustine developed a specific type of linear idea of time, but at the same time the idea of monks of Benedictine, it was the idea that the circle of time is really important because God is eternal, therefore the thinking continue in relation with the idea of circular time, because as a sort of Stoicism idea there is a repetition of behaviors, not the same as Stoicism, because according to the Stoicism things continue and rehappen in relation with the idea of cause and effects, but according to Benedict's the cause and effects are also different between gods, because there are natural things that happen, but at the same time God is not at the origins as eternal thing and cannot, or better, origins things, but God cannot be the origins and as thing, because God also is eternal and always is eternal. This is really important. Therefore, the idea of circular time. And ora et labora, because these monks that they have to continue to develop also the attitudes according to the idea of Benedict monks. It is important that a monk has to enter in a monastery when he considers really important to develop also his attitudes, also in relation with his type of prayer. For example, a monk that he considers important to do a specific type of activity in that sense, as another type of monk that they does that activity but in another type of sense with a different type of behaviors. This is really interesting. Therefore, an idea of interpretation of a specific type of activity in relation with the idea of interpretation of a monk into the rule of Saint Benedictine. This is really important because therefore according to this type of idea, there is a specific type of freedom that the monk has in relation with the interpretation of the rule, but also in relation with the idea of his attitudes. The rule of Benedictine and the monasteries during the Middle Ages didn't want to be specific in this sense. A monk has to be free to pursue his attitudes in relation with main rule. And in this sense, the main rule and this type of attitudes, this type of this type of development of behaviors, it is connected with the idea of Christianity, and it is really different from a specific type of modern philosophy. For example, the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, that wanted a specific type of different type of subjective ideas, not maintain in relation with a specific type of objective rule. In this sense, the Benedictines didn't consider that, they consider that there is an objective rule, differently by Hobbes. According to Hobbes, there are no objective rules, and people develop only their subjective ideas. According to the monks, instead, there is an objective rule, the rule of San Benedictine, that they have to follow. But at the same time, this type of rule can be interpreted. Therefore, according to Hobbes, is necessary the social contract to live the homo homini lupus. Therefore, the idea that there is only a war between all. According to the monks, there is no war between all, because there is a specific type of main objective rule that is that it was developed by God in relation with the idea of intellect, that it is part of a human meaning, and San Benedictine developed that human meaning as a specific type of rule. On the other hand, only in a second time, man can develop this type of rule differently between monasteries, between attitudes in relation with individuals that participate to that specific type of community in relation with the idea of monastery. This is really interesting, because therefore, according to the monks, there is a specific type of idea of constitutionalism that develop a specific type of common sense between the monasteries that in a secondary time can develop a specific type of differences between monasteries and interpretation in front of this type of rule, always in relation with the main idea, objective rule. This type of idea, it is really important, because this idea of objective rule will find the idea of constitutionalism that it will arrive to the, for example, origins of the United States of America, for example, in its constitution and declaration of independence in 1776. But the idea of objective rule, interpreted in different type of ideas, maintained on this rule, it was of the monks of the rule of San Benedictine. Bye.